Thank you very much for coming to my session. I will be open and say that this title is the first time this has ever been this title. So the original title of this session that I've been giving since around January was actually Swearing, Nudity and Other Vulnerable Positions. And there were some concerns about that title. I have now normally start by apologizing that actually there won't be any nudity, which you are probably equal parts relieved and disappointed at, well, hopefully. So let's jump right in. So my name's John LeDrew. As I said, I'm very boring. I've been a software engineer for about 20 years, as well as being a consultant and now more agile coach and organizational coach. Last year, I decided to start a podcast called The Agile Path. And I wanted to do something creatively different. I have some background in sound production. I wanted to do something that was creatively different from the other podcasts in the agile space, but I really had no idea what I wanted to talk about. So I went to Scotland. There happened to be a conference going on there, a fantastic one that, as it happens, is going on. This year's one is going on in a few days, but sadly I'm not going to be missing it this year. And I went there and I just spoke to as many people as I could. I went round and stuck a microphone in people's faces and just said, I just want to talk to you about what matters to you in when you're working with teams and collaboration. And it seemed that every single person, everyone that I spoke to said or seemed to hint or infer towards this idea of safety. They'd say things like, but the team just wasn't safe. You could see they weren't safe. And I was like, that's interesting, because I knew instinctively as a coach what they meant by that. That just immediately resonated. I was like, yeah, I know what you mean, but what do you mean? What actually does that mean? And people would say things like, oh, you can just tell by the way they walk in the room. You can just see the way they walk in the room. The way they look at each other. I was like, no, that's not good enough for me. I really wanted to find out what this was. So I left, it seemed like this, it seemed like safety was essential, was this essential core thing, but enigmatic in a way. It was like dark matter or dark energy. It was kind of the thing holding the whole universe together, but nobody really knows what it is. So I left thinking that this would be a nice kind of self-contained topic that was like a nice starting point. Okay, this is great, seems really important. There's a bit of mystery behind it. I can do some research. It'll be great. Nice first episode. But once I actually began to dive into and recognize the depth of this subject, like Alice, down the rabbit hole I tumbled. So I ended up speaking to many, many, many people. Some of these people are very well known. Some of these people were engineers on the team that I was coaching at the time to kind of find out what safety means to them. What does that actually mean? What does that word mean to them? And as well as that, I also started my own research. Now, this led me to a project called Google's Project Aristotle. Can I have a show of hands? Who's heard of Project Aristotle before? Great. It's always a small handful. So for those of you that haven't, so what Google wanted to try and find out was, as you know, you've probably heard of them, they're quite a big company. I believe they're doing some stuff here as well. Is that Google have loads of different teams. They do lots of different things internationally. And they wanted to find out what makes one team, really good. Why is there one team good and another team not so much? And they hypothesized that it wasn't the obvious answer. Clearly, Team A, amazing people. They've got the best people. Team B, not so much. And they surmised that maybe this wasn't true. Maybe this basic idea that seems almost common sense, really, wasn't actually at the heart of this. And they started, where Project Aristotle gets its name, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So they started their research in 2012, and they worked with, I think there was around 180 teams, which is probably around 1,500 people over 2 years. And they discovered that for them, anyway, team effectiveness wasn't actually about the composition of the team, but more about how that team worked together, how they collaborated. So what makes a great team? So they found 5 key indicators that teams that were effective, or team members on effective teams at Google, demonstrated. So we're going to go through these from the top. So starting at number 5, we've got impact. So team members need to feel that their work actually has impact. If you start work at Facebook, for example, they've got a well-known developer bootcamp program. And within the first few days of you joining, regardless of the level, regardless of whether you're a junior engineer or a senior experienced engineer, within the first few days, you will put some code live. You will see the impact of your changes immediately. There's another study in a book called The Progress Principle by a lady called Teresa Amabile, if I can say her name properly. Now, she wrote this book called The Progress Principle, looking into motivation. So she basically took daily diaries from, I think, a number of thousand individuals across America, all working as knowledge workers in a range of different things, both software engineering teams, physical hardware engineering teams, science teams, etc. And she found out that teams that were most motivated, most engaged, were the ones making regular progress on meaningful work. So by her definition, that's every day these team members reported little wins. Every day. And by far, that was the most important thing. So there's another half of that. Meaningful work, and that takes us to number 4, which is meaning. So in 1983, Steve Jobs tried to entice John Sculley, famously from PepsiCo, to join as Apple's new CEO. And he told him, do you want to make sugared water for the rest of your life, or do you want to change the world? Jobs actually tapped into this innate human desire to do meaningful work. We want to do stuff that has meaning, but does that mean that we need to be putting a desktop computer on the entire world's desk? Or does that mean that we have to be curing cancer or alleviating the world of poverty? Because sadly, most of us are not working in organizations that are doing those things. Well, it doesn't. Something has meaning for you as long as the work that you're doing relates to you personally or to someone that you care about. And that often shows itself, and the one most effective area that I've seen that demonstrating is in collaboration. When you effectively collaborate with other people, you find meaning in that work through the support that you give those other people. So there was a study done, I think it was probably about 10 years ago at Utah University, looking into pair programming. And one of the most interesting things, so there's a bunch of great things about pair programming. It's a practice that I love. But interestingly, as well as the quality benefits, so the definitive, you're going to produce better quality code that will come out of pairing, it also showed that 96% of developers in this particular study reported that they thoroughly enjoyed the work more than working on their own. And these were mostly developers that hadn't paired prior to that. I think there was about 50 or 60 devs that they worked with for the duration of the study, and none of them had paired previously. And they all were like, no, this is amazing, this is great, this really changes the way I work. And what's more, around the same number, I think around 90% also said that they had more confidence in the work that they actually produced. The quality of the work seemed better from their perspective. They felt better about the work. And that actually hits upon 2 really important things around meaning, which is that one aspect of meaning is that supporting each other. When you feel that you have effectively collaborated with someone, it feels awesome. You get that shared, almost euphoric, we nailed that moment. And then the other side is that actually the increase in quality that you get from that intense collaboration is highly satisfying, because you know what? Most engineers, as the previous speaker in this room was talking about, we want to do our best work. That's what motivates anyone. We want to know that we can do the best work that we can do. And feeling that we're able to, and pairing is one practice that can really help engineers do that, is awesome. So structure and clarity. Teams really need to know what they're doing to do good at what they're doing. This means knowing what the organizational goal is, what your project goal is, and how you fit into that. How do you fit into your team, and how does your team's work move the company towards the goals? I'll ask a question. Show of hands, who right now could confidently say that they know what their organizational goal is, they know what their current project's goal is, and they know that the work they're doing is moving the company towards those goals? Oh, wow. That's amazing. Okay, you guys work for amazing companies. Having done that, asked that question many times, that's probably 10 times more than average, at least, that I've seen. So you guys work for some of the best companies then. You should be proud. In my experience, both when I ask that question and also in the teams I work with, actually most people are really not on the same page when it comes to this. I do an exercise with teams where I will normally get them all to go away to the corners of the room and in secret and silence write down on a Post-it note what they consider the team goal, project goal, organizational goal to be. Once, a couple of years ago, in a number of years of running this exercise, I had them actually agree. And all 8 team members of this team went away, they came back, handed me their Post-it notes, and I stick them up on the wall at the same time, and I was presented with 8 question marks. So, next one, dependability. So this is on the surface, not very surprising. The teams that get stuff done, reliably shipping regularly, they are regarded as better teams than the teams that are not reliably shipping. Utterly unsurprising from my perspective. There is actually more to this, which is that external dependability, which is what these teams are demonstrating, is actually supported by internal interdependability. So this means that team members within the team can depend on one another. Now, on one side, this means you could say, well, that is basically me being able to say, oh, I'm going to get this done. I'll get that thing done by the end of the day, and me doing that reliably. So that's, again, really just people doing the work that they promised to do. But actually, it's not really a dependence on reliable delivery internal to the team, because everyone will mess up. Everyone will have problems. Everyone's going to hit a brick wall when they're problem solving sometimes. And that in itself shouldn't break that dependability. What it actually is a dependence on communication. So I can depend on you to deliver upon what you said you're going to deliver. But I also know that you will communicate with me about any problems that you face as early as you can. And this is not talking about, by the way, manager-team member relationship. This is absolutely between peers on the team. People need to be able to raise the red flag when they think they're getting stuck. So Google found that psychological safety was the number one. And what's more, this wasn't just the most important element in their study. They found that this underpinned the other 4. So the teams at Google, at least, that didn't have, when they discovered they didn't have psychological safety, they were severely impaired and were very unlikely to have any of the other indicators. So why is it important? So we are all reluctant, deeply reluctant, to do anything that could cause us to be perceived negatively. In general, around things to do with our competence, our perceived awareness, or our perceived positivity. So, competence. Do you feel that you can ask for help without being judged on your competency? Awareness. Do you feel that you can always ask what the goal is and where you fit without people thinking that you're out of the loop? and positivity, do you always feel that you can raise the red flag when it's important without being accused of, being the negative one? So this actually started back in 1999. There were previous studies, but Amy Edmondson was the first individual to look specifically at psychological safety within the learning context or in collaborative in the workplace. Now, she defines this as one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. Now, when I first read that, I really struggled with punished or humiliated because these words felt so strong. They didn't feel like the workplaces that I was researching. And I'm not saying that there are not horrifically abusive workplaces out there. There are definitely very abusive workplaces. But they were, frankly, they've got more problems than I could cover in this session. And also, they're not the majority, thankfully. The majority of us don't work. In fact, from the looks of the show of hands before, you definitely don't. And so I really struggled with that. I was like, I can't get my head around it. Managers don't really punish their employees. Go and stand in the store cupboard for 30 minutes and think about why you failed the sprint. Or, humiliation. I'm just imagining like a whole team pointing and laughing at some poor engineer that admitted to not knowing the recent, the current NoSQL database that was released last week or something. It seemed that just kind of incredible. It just seemed such an extreme term. And until for me, I realized that this is not an externally observable thing necessarily. This is an internal experience. It feels like punishment to be overlooked for that pay rise or that promotion or even just that recognition because you've done something or something else. That feels like punishment. It feels humiliating to be told to go RTFM because you don't know anything about the new tech that the team is all so passionate about this minute. So let's have a look at some of the ways that we might get this. So one of the people I interviewed was a chap called Phelan McDermott. He's an Olivier Award-winning theatre director, and he's been doing improvised theatre for some 20 years. Now, he told me about this concept called the yes and muscle, which he describes as the most critical kind of element of improv theatre. So what yes and means is that the yes portion refers to accepting an offer. So an offer in improv, who's seen an improv show before? Has anyone done any improv before? A few hands? Okay, so in improv, generally, you have a group of performers on the stage, and they will come up with a scene, normally given some constraints off the top of their heads. And normally, it will start with one individual making what's referred to as an offer. So it could be someone walking through an imaginary door on stage and saying, "Honey, I'm home." And then hopefully, I'm a little lonely up here, but hopefully there would be another performer ready to receive that offer, and they're going to accept it. They're just going to go, okay, yes, I hear that offer, that's an idea, that's something that we're going to be presenting. And I'm going to listen to that properly and work out, okay, so what's he suggesting? He says, honey, I'm home. I guess I'm a partner. We're in a relationship perhaps. Maybe I'm not the honey. Maybe I'm someone else. It could be anything. And then I'm going to think about what I want to do and respond to that. So in this case, I might go, I'm just in the shower, darling. I'll be down in a minute. And then hopefully a scene will continue from that. The other option is that I could just block. I could not engage with that. I could start a completely different thread. I can do a whole variety of things that generally involve not listening to the offered suggestion or creating things that make it far harder to tell stories. Now, interestingly, Phelan said that more experienced improv performers will definitely block at times, often for humorous reasons. But when you start doing improv, and people that are very new to it, you teach them to just say yes all the time. Just learn to say yes, because a lot of the time people don't realize when they're saying no. So you need to pay attention to your fellow performers to make an environment, to make sure rather you're expanding upon what they have offered and not creating an environment that stymies creativity. So we're going to do a couple of exercises, and while we're doing that, I'd like you to think about how in the next creative meeting or planning meeting or session, how having a yes and on the top of your mind might change the way that you interact with other people. If you're looking for, as they say, looking for what they're doing right rather than looking for what they're doing wrong in the suggestions people are making, how that would change. So to begin with, what I'd like you to do is everyone stand up on your feet, and you're going to need to find a partner. So ideally someone you don't know, because it's a lot more fun then, but if you happen to know them, you don't need to walk around the room. Now you're going to stand opposite. I'll climb up here so you can see me. I know I won't be in the camera, but it's all right. You're going to hold your hands up like this. So face each other and hold your hands opposite. One of you is the mirror and the other person is being reflected. So what you need to do is start moving very, very slowly. It's a lot harder if you move quickly, and try to reflect one another. And while you're doing that, I'd like you to see if you can swap over. So that means people that were watching you wouldn't necessarily know who was being reflected and who was the mirror. So just go for it. As slowly as you can. I find that people automatically smile at each other desperately. There is some desperation in that smiling. We evolved smiling as mammals to stop our parents from eating us, would you believe it? So that's clearly why it's an innate defense mechanism. Thank you very much. So I love that exercise. It's a really great warm-up exercise and quite a lot of fun. So what we're going to do now is an exercise called String of Pearls. So String of Pearls is a storytelling exercise. So we're going to tell a story. The story is going to begin here with a volunteer, one of you wonderful people, is going to come up and say the sentence to the beginning of a story. Something along the lines of, once upon a time there was a lunatic in a Flash t-shirt giving a talk. Then we're going to have another volunteer come up and stand somewhere around here. And that person's going to tell us how this story ends. So at this point, we will have a sentence that will tell us the beginning of the story and a sentence that will be the end of the story, but we won't know how we're going to get there. It's a little bit like almost every project you've ever worked on. Then what we will do is iterate on this story. So we're going to have volunteers come up and fill in the gaps. You can add a bit into the story along anywhere in that timeline, wherever you feel you have something to add. And each time we do that, we'll reread the line and we'll keep going until we either completely fail and all have to go home and they kick us out, or hopefully we end up with a story that will sort of make sense in the universe that we will create here together. So can I get a volunteer? This is the most terrifying part of this moment. Yeah, go ahead. So if you come and stand sort of here, I think, is a good point, and I'll give you... Hello. Yeah, that works. All right, there we go. I'll give you that. And then you say your sentence.
Once upon a time, there was a sad, sad web server.
Oh, I like that. I love how it always becomes, so centered. I was doing it at a conference that was very developer-centric recently, and it was all about... Yeah, so does anyone want to come up with the end? So the end of the story. So this is the last sentence. And if you say your line, and we'll say both. So this is the end of the story.
And then the space station exploded in a great big fire explosion.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, I like a good apocalyptic end to a story. So if you say your line again, and we'll reread both the parts, and then people will come up and add in. Oh yeah, come back. Sorry. Thanks for letting me know they're escaping.
You can't leave now.
Yeah, you have to stay here. I think that's probably the... Yeah, there we go. Oh.
Once upon a time, there was a sad, sad web server.
And then space station exploded.
Oh, okay, so we've got an exploding space station and a sad web server. How do we get from a sad web server to an exploding space station if that isn't obvious to everyone? So can anyone add in? There are definitely some DevOps experts in the room that can enlighten us to how that could happen, I'm sure. Any ideas? Yeah, go ahead. Running's good. It gets the blood flowing, oxygen to the brain. So say your line and we'll reread the rest of the things.
There was an alert sent at 2 a.m. to the on-call person.
So reread the line, please.
Once upon a time, there was a sad, sad web server.
There was an alert sent at 2 a.m. to the on-call person.
And then the space station has exploded.
All right. Yeah. So any ideas? Yeah, here we go. You stand wherever you fit. Yeah.
The alert person didn't take the call because he was occupied with somebody he loved.
Well, at least he loved them, you know. So let's reread the line.
Once upon a time, there was a sad, sad web server.
Then an alert went out at 2 a.m. to the on-call person.
The on-call person didn't take the alert. He was occupied with the person he loved.
And then the space station has exploded.
So I feel like the web server, I'd like to know what the space station has to do with it. Anyone? Yeah, come straight up. Let's see how this develops. We could leave it now, but I feel there's so much more to tell of this tale.
The phone flew up through the air and broke the atmosphere.
Oh, yes. Let's reread the line and see where we're up to. This is
Just saying, putting your pager on a trebuchet can be very therapeutic. Once upon a time, there was a sad, sad web server.
Then an alert went out at 2 a.m. to the on-call person.
The on-call person didn't take the alert. He was occupied with somebody he loved.
The phone flew through the air and broke the atmosphere.
And then the space station has exploded.
Do we have a story? Are we happy with that story? Does anyone have any more to add? We can always add more.
Come on, people.
Anyone? Is it possible to expand this anymore? I think so. The phone broke the atmosphere. I mean, there's more than the web. Frankly, with the atmosphere, is that the atmosphere on the space station? I don't know. Yeah, there's more.
Somehow fire must have been started.
Yeah. What happened? Who knew that DevOps could be so destructive? Yeah, good. It was the Samsung. I think you might want to add that. Do you want to add that? Would you feel comfortable adding that? In the middle, you can come up wherever you want. Yeah. Go ahead. Thank you very much. So this is all coming together.
So it was the Samsung Galaxy Note.
So let's reread the line, and I think we might possibly.
Once upon a time, there was a sad, sad web server.
Then there was an alert that went out to the on-call person at 2 a.m.
The on-call person didn't take the alert. He was occupied with somebody he loved.
The phone flew through the air and broke the atmosphere.
It was a Samsung Galaxy Note.
And then the space station has exploded.
I think we might be there. I think we should. It's traditional to cheer loudly when we reach to a story. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. So, all right. So the first question: did we tell a good story in this exercise? What do you think? Was it amazing? I normally scale it from sort of 5-part Netflix miniseries up to Hollywood blockbuster, Oscar-winning. I don't know, somewhere between those two, definitely. Was the activity engaging? We find it an engaging activity for both the people that were watching and people that would take part. So why do we think we found it engaging? What made it more interesting as an activity? Go ahead.
A lot of risk involved.
A lot of risk. Yeah, that's right. A lot of risk. It can be quite scary to get up and be creative and hopefully funny and all of the things that you're trying to do when you do the exercise. Anyone else? Okay, yeah. Anyone? Just shout it out. I'll repeat it if the.
Actually, the audience was super supportive.
The audience was super supportive. Yeah, and interestingly, I found that even when I've done this a lot of times now since the beginning of the year, that audiences are always super supportive, even very, very geeky audiences. When I've done it there and I was really terrified of doing this in front of a room full of hardcore devs, because I just thought that either they wouldn't come up or they'd start throwing hard objects or something, and no, everyone's very supportive. So how I see it is that it was safe to contribute without embarrassment. We created an environment where it was safe to contribute. There wasn't any judgment. People said what they want, and the team, we just kind of work with what we're given. We say, okay, that's interesting. And as people contribute, you have ideas, and you get ideas, and everyone's kind of continues that creative process. We also do have autonomy, although I did pick on someone and get him to come up, so that was potentially questionable. But I tend to find that generally people will come up, and they come up and they volunteer themselves to come up. And there is a gradual increase in peer pressure. And that's a subtle thing that happens, is that as you're working through it, especially if the group's smaller, and I've done this with quite small groups, when you have like more people on stage than there are sat down, and the peer pressure to get involved, they suddenly realize, hey, I'm not part of the majority anymore. I want to be up there with the cool kids. But that's a kind of natural thing that builds. And also, it's safe to fail. Actually, most of the time, we're not telling the most amazing story. But what's interesting is that if you look at, and you can Google String of Pearls, or it's called a bunch of other names as well, but if you Google it, you'll find a whole load of very, very experienced improv groups doing this exercise. But actually, every time they do it, they are very, very good, but they probably tell much better stories now than they did the first time they did it. And every single time that you do the exercise, you'll learn a little bit more about how to collaborate. And interestingly, the exercise is actually nothing to do with storytelling at all. It's almost exclusively to do with listening and collaboration and responding. So after I did my own research and spoke to all of those people, I kind of tweaked that definition slightly to one that resonated more with me. So, as I see it, you're safe when you can speak your truth, raise your concerns, and give and receive constructive feedback without humiliation, rejection, or punishment. So, one of the things I see in many of the teams that I've worked with is that is when you start to speak to them, a lot of teams are actually completely unaware of how safe or unsafe they are, despite very obviously, for someone like myself who'll come in and work with teams who are, who are in varying degrees of safety. Some of these teams will be exhibiting all kinds of very overt symptoms of unsafety, and they won't be listening to each other. There'll be a lot of tension, a lot of fear a lot of the time. But they would never actually openly say, oh, no, I feel unsafe, or necessarily say that this didn't apply to them. So one of the areas that I focus on the most is awareness. It's just how do I increase the awareness of psychological safety within the teams? So I call this paying attention. So this breaks down into 3.5 levels. So level 1 is what I call experiential safety. So this is knowing yourself. This is knowing you. Knowing being mindful of how you are in the moment and saying, okay, well, right now I feel like I can contribute. That's great. I feel fine. And then being aware when that changes, when I wonder what's just happened. I felt like I could contribute 5 minutes ago, but now I don't. What's happened? Is it because someone's come in the room that I don't actually feel safe contributing around? Is it because I'm just different in me? Is it because I'm just too tired? Is it because there's a whole load of things that can affect your ability to feel that you can, be who you are, that you can express yourselves when you can raise concerns. And it's really getting to know the things that make you feel safe and the things that don't, because it's different for everyone. Once you have that, then you're actually able to, you can expand your attention. And you can expand your attention to the people that you work with every day. And those people are all of the people on your team. And you can start to look at those individuals and sort of say, okay, that's interesting, because I know that I felt safe in that situation, but maybe maybe James isn't feeling safe right now. I don't think he is able to contribute. Now, is that something that I'm doing? Is that something that the team is doing? Is that something that's happened to him personally? And showing a bit of curiosity in those circumstances. One thing to remember is that in Buddhism, they talk about how every negative behavior is an externalization of what in Buddhism they call suffering. Now, that's a very deep concept in Buddhism, but I actually kind of stole that, and I like to say that almost every negative behavior you see is an externalization of people feeling unsafe in their professional context. Something's going on. At the top level, you have environmental safety. So this actually breaks down into two parts. So the first part is the organizational system. So this is the organization and potentially policies, often the boring things, unfortunately often come from the HR department, which is unfair on them, but they do tend to be the source of a lot of the policies that can negatively affect individuals. This is frequently seen in the various performance assessment metrics, annual review cycles, bonus schemes, etc., almost all of which don't help on any of the things that they could help with. And then on the other side, there's personal environment, which is, well, your life. This is all of the other stuff that we have going on. And you may well have an organization that says something like, we leave our personal lives at home, because that would be unprofessional to have a personal life, obviously. I don't know about you, but I've never found a cloakroom big enough to just sort of hang my personal life in and leave it there. And for some reason, it gets stuck. It's sort of like I can't actually take it off, which is very annoying, which makes me obviously unemployable and unprofessional. But the important thing here is that when you see people's negative behavior, when you see someone who isn't collaborating as you might like, who isn't performing as you might like, who seems to be making mistakes, is to address that situation with curiosity. A fantastic guy called Rich Sheridan, who runs a company just outside of Detroit called Menlo Innovations. He wrote a book called Joy Inc. that I thoroughly recommend. When I met up with him at Menlo, he was talking to me about how the official policy for dealing with the kind of what you could call kind of a negative behavior that isn't conducive with the organization. Everyone has those days. And their official recommended policy is just to say, are you okay? Think about those times when you've potentially not been on your best behavior and how it would have made a difference if someone had just asked you if you were okay, as opposed to whatever else could potentially have happened. So paying attention is about noticing how you're feeling and understanding your kind of status quo. What's your level of safety in a certain situation? And then approaching other people with curiosity and not judgment. So why does this matter? What's the most important thing? Why does this matter to the rest of the world? So this is a study, this is the Gallup survey. This is taken from their daily stats, so they measure engagement. And every day, Gallup do interview 1,500 people across the states, as well as their more involved studies. They found that around 2/3 of the US are disengaged or actively disengaged with work. Those 15% that are actively disengaged are actively disengaging these people as well. Looking at this definition, having an opportunity to do what I do best each day, having someone at work who encourages my development, and believing my opinions count, I don't know, but I don't think much of that is possible without psychological safety. Another slightly depressing study, again, around 2/3 of the US workforce say that work is a somewhat or very significant contributor to the effects of negative stress in their lives. And 1 in 2 say that they shouted at their partner or lost patience with their kids while experiencing stress. So I wanted to know what the relationship was. A chap called Professor Bakker and his peers came up with a thing called the job demands resources model that shows us that when we're actually engaged with work, we are more resilient to the negative effects of stress. So there are a bunch of studies hundreds of studies done when I was researching this, that tell me what seems really obvious, which is that if you look at an organization and interview their employees, when you find high levels of stress, you find low levels of engagement. That seemed really obvious to me. You take a bunch of unhappy people and they're not very engaged with their work. I was really interested in the inverse of that relationship, which is, well, maybe low levels of engagement causes high levels of stress. So what the JDR model shows us is that in the workforce, you have motivation and you have stress, basically, or strain. And they counter each other. So stress reduces, or strain reduces the amount of motivation. Motivation reduces the amount of stress. And motivation could be analogized to engagement and other things. So I use an anecdote. So just imagine you're in the office at 7 p.m. and your manager charges in through the door. "Oh, God!" screaming. "The CEO's coming tomorrow. We need to show him something." And you go, "Well, we only started this project an hour and a half ago. I mean, there's probably not going to be much by tomorrow." When tomorrow? The morning! Look, I don't think this is going to be really possible. I mean, look, I told him we started the project last week. I know I only told you about it today. Look, I need you to do something. And he storms out. The door slams behind him. Eventually, by 2 a.m., buzzed on 9 gallons of coffee, you finish something, probably made with marshmallow and spaghetti sticks. And you leave, and you get home, and you can't sleep, because who can really sleep with 2 gallons of coffee in their system? And you're stressed, because you know it's going to break, and you know whose fault that will be when it breaks. And then the other analogy is it's 7 p.m., and you've just started work on a project that you are so excited to be starting. This is this project, the one that you've been waiting for. You've just got off some awful project. This one is the one. And you look up at the clock and it's 2 a.m. And you're like, whoa, it's 2 a.m. Okay, I better go home. And you get home and you lie in bed, but those ideas are still going in your head. And you think, all right, whatever. And you pick up your laptop and you sit and work until the birds are tweeting outside and the sun's coming up. And you walk into the office in the morning holding your laptop above your head. You're in early. I did it, guys! And despite having not slept and worked all night, I mean, the first thing the guys are going to say is, what the hell have you written? Please don't work through the night ever again. But you're not stressed. So, to finish, safety is the #1 indicator of effective teams. This has been shown not only in research from Google, but multiple studies since then. And without it, there can be no engagement. You can't truly be engaged in the work that you do unless you feel safe to collaborate with people. And what's more, engagement gives us this shield against what the WHO describe as the worldwide epidemic of the 21st century, which is stress. So I like to end on this quote from Arlo he gave me while we were chatting. Safety is a very profound thing, and not being emotionally abusive in the workplace sure would make the world a better place. Thank you very much.